Welcome to the Longevity Lounge, a podcast, a club, and an event series that seeks to uncover some of the secrets to living well and feeling younger longer. Every episode, we interview a longevity legend or a health expert, from neuroscientists through to exercise physiologists, as we investigate and try to make sense of the emerging science behind longevity. I'm Karl Treacher. I'm an adjunct associate professor of social science, and I'm joined by my co-host and co-founder of the Longevity Lounge, former world Ironman champion, Guy Leech. Today on the Longevity Lounge, we're joined by our relationship expert, Michael Myerscough. He's the founder of the Reconnection Institute and has been a practitioner for over 2 decades. Welcome to the program.
Very glad to be here. Thanks for having me on the lounge.
It's a very exciting topic, really. I mean, we have a lot of science-based experts. Not that your profession isn't science-based, but relationships, we don't naturally go to that to think it's important for longevity, but I'm sure that's not the case.
So you'd be right. I think the science is very important and people do neglect it. If you take it, there's an experiment that's gone on for 75 years with Harvard, which is enormous. And they've proven beyond any doubt that intimacy and connection keep you alive longer. They have an absolute understanding that the quality of your relationship and your relationship satisfaction at the age of 50 dictates how well and how long you'll live. So by 75, things look entirely different depending on the quality of your relationship.
Wow.
So for me, it's sleep first in terms of health and well-being, because that massively dictates your mood and how you experience life. And the second thing is your relationship, and everything else is supplemental.
Hmm. Now, Leechy,
interesting.
Bring you here.
I would have thought exercise was the key one, and then sleep and relationships would go there. But that's just, I'm not the expert though. I must say though, proudly, Michael, that this year's my 20-year wedding anniversary. So I did have a couple of early marriages, learned a lot from them. Back in those days, being a professional athlete, there is a lot of truth to say that I was at my best racing when my relationships at home were going well. If they were in strife, then I tended to not race as well and have as good a results, for sure.
There's a cost to industry in terms of marriages and when things are going sideways. I have a great story about a guy that was brokenhearted, and he's the navigator on a ferry somewhere in Canada, and managed to run the ferry aground because he fainted due to the pain that he was in. That's millions of dollars worth of damage right there. And that's just one tiny little example that kind of tickles me. But time and time again, people are showing up in horrendous states, or just getting drunk all over the place because they're in so much pain. And there's a massive cost. Intimacy and feeling connected dictates how healthy you are. The Gottmans have proven there's a definite correlation between the level of contempt in your marriage and how often you get infectious illnesses.
Wow.
So when you come in to compete at top level, clearly having your relationship be satisfying and supportive has a massive bearing in terms of how consistently you can show up.
Michael, let's just get to some of the traps that people fall into as they age in relationships. I'm sure you've seen thousands of people, but as we get older, typically we become more complacent just generally in life. And does that then transfer into our relationships, and what's the impact?
The first thing I want to say, listening to you, Guy, that the complacency is a massive issue in relationships. So basically, those people that stay together 20 or 30 years are thoroughly miserable. By the time they come in to see me and they've been together 30 years, I'm like, this is not good. Right. Especially if they get together when they're 16, because there's no real reason to grow up. You're just each other's version of yourselves. However, people that have been through 2 or 3 wreckages, at some point you have to start asking yourself, maybe it's me. Because in the early days, we'll blame everybody else and anybody else. It's basic self-defense, right? It makes sense on an evolution level, but it doesn't do well in relationships. So by your third one, often you're in much better shape. Now, some people show up healthy, I don't know how, but there are 3 attachment styles, one of which is healthy. Those people tend to marry very early and then disappear from view, and they just live happily ever after. And the rest of us are a combination of either avoidance or pursuers, and then we just make each other miserable for quite a while until we learn some tools, some skills in terms of showing up healthy and decent. So in terms of aging and decades, it's just depths of stupidity, and rigidity and resentment and roiling, pain. It's a bit of a problem.
I'd like to say, just on my behalf, that getting married when I was 40 for the third time was probably a wake-up call, in that I thought I can't go and do another one like the others, but certainly I'd learned a lot by the time I got to 40, and I was in a different stage of my life, so I wasn't competing full-time as an athlete. Is a selfish pursuit when you're an individual athlete performing and, you know, trying to win. And the other thing is, I think looking back, is that when you're racing and you're trying to tell yourself that you're the best, whether you're winning or you're not winning, there's a level of not blaming yourself for not winning, because you can't afford to not think that you're great and you're good, because it goes with everything that goes into, you know, trying to feel confident, which then blends into other areas of your life. And when I finished competing, I tried as hard as I could to try to change that mentality and not have that opinion, like you said, where it's everyone else's fault, not mine.
Right. It's really interesting. The sports psychology and what's necessary there is the polar opposite of what we need in relationships. In a relationship, you want to be open, honest, and vulnerable. In sports, that is the last thing you can be. Those guys kicking a ball around are not going to be vulnerable, because if anybody spots weakness, they will be annihilated.
And your coach is telling you, like you got second last week, you know, Guy, mate, you were awesome. You didn't do any, like we just, you know, you just need to clean up here, but you're better than the rest. You know, the conditions today got the better of you. It wasn't you. You'll be right next week to go again. And that's the narrative that's been given to you, to your career. Because if you start thinking that you're not good enough, well, then you're not at your best. But you do take that into the rest of your life.
And the problem there will be, it's like the golden child syndrome. You know, like, you're amazing, you're incredible. It couldn't possibly be your fault. So your partner shows up with an issue. It's like, well, what's this got to do with me?
Yeah.
You know, how's this about me? Like, it's your shit, deal with it. And that's horrific. Athletes and marriages is tricky. You know, like professional athletes stop kissing their wives because they don't want to risk getting infections. That's crazy, right?
Listen, don't talk about me while I'm here, okay? And that was a long time ago.
I've never kissed Karl.
That was a long time ago.
Fair.
Michael, you would have a range of stories, good and bad, I imagine.
Oh, I do.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Do you want to share a couple of stories that you think, maybe we'll start with the bad, because everyone's interested in dysfunction.
All right. Now, to be clear, right, I love all these people. Like all the people I've worked with, and I'm referring to, are people I really liked. Otherwise, I wouldn't be holding on to them.
Are you going to change names here, or just not mention names at all?
Names and jobs, maybe. You know, like this guy was a shark wrangler, and he shows up with his wife, and they are nasty together. Like, when they get angry, I mean, he has a significant amount of trauma from his job, as you can imagine. They end up in one scene one night where he's got his gun pressed into her forehead, going, "I'm going to kill you," and she's going, "Shoot me, you pussy." Right? That's how bad contempt can get in relationships and marriages. Like, that is unforgivable on both sides. You can't say that to a guy.
No.
And you really shouldn't be sticking your gun in somebody's forehead either.
Probably not.
Maybe that one.
Now, they survived, but apparently she had an indentation for a week or so. But I tell that story just as an illustration of just how traumatic relationship stress can be. There are deeper pieces of the brain that are a lot more primal in terms of fight, flight, freeze, which will get us into just insane situations. That's about the most insane I've ever come across. I've got a case currently. I worked with him 7 years ago, and I saved their marriage because he'd started shagging hookers. And he thought it was a good idea at the time. Turned out, sex addiction running wild. We fixed all of that, got him level, a little bit of medication. He's living happily ever after until he decides he's good without the medication. He started watching porn again, and now he's suddenly announced to his wife he's been living a lie for the past 7 years, and he's totally committed to being able to go out and see hookers again because, in his words, he wants to be able to abuse women and for it to be okay, like in terms of slapping and choking and all the rest of it.
Wow.
But more interesting, like, this is a completely credible guy, a little bit like ourselves, who's gone off the piste, and he's now living in a caravan 10 minutes down the road from his family, pretending he's living the dream, right?
Jeez.
Like, the levels of craziness that we can get into on the basis of, you know, addiction or insecurity is absolutely unfathomable to people outside of it. But these are the kind of things that walk in. And again, it's an illustration. Like, you've got to listen to your friends and have enough support and understanding and belief in people that, you know, the intimacy allows you to stay connected as opposed to just stupid.
I'm assuming honesty, like having someone you can ring up to give you the truth and tell you how it is.
Yeah.
And the good and the bad. is what you need, isn't it, in life? Someone you can trust to just tell you maybe you're not, what you're thinking is not probably right. Need to do something about it.
And you see, and that's not a small point. Like people, when they're in it and they're triggered, they don't know that they're triggered and you can't tell them. So if you've got 3 or 4 people around you, it's where interventions come in. It's like, look, you've lost the plot. And currently this guy can't be told. There's a whole thing about self-will run riot, as in, it's like he knows best. And it's painful.
I was just going back in the days of racing where, you start telling yourself how good you are. And your performance performance improves. It's like the 6 inches between your ears and what you think and what you start telling yourself becomes your reality. And in some ways, it can create unbelievable performances, from a sports point of view, but just lack of reality based on certain ways you theme up a thought.
Yes.
In your own head, and then just keep telling yourself and reinforcing that it's okay.
Absolutely. And that's that whole thing around grandiosity and entitlement. You can say that money is to grandiosity what petrol is to fire, but you can also say it about fame, or power through, sports performance. So in some ways, it's an amazing and incredible, but it also comes with certain risks in terms of if you start believing your own PR, you could have a significant problem quite quickly, especially with your intimate partner.
What? Tell me, like COVID must have been a weird time in your game where people are surviving and balancing their relationships at home, up until COVID where they've got a job and they might go away on trips and all the rest of it. And then there's that balance there. And all of a sudden they're put into the same house 24/7. And it would expose any issues that were there and get magnified. It must have been just an interesting time for you and what you do.
Interesting is a very horrific.
Yeah.
Like some people are only getting along because they don't see each other for 12 hours of a day.
Exactly.
And then when everybody was locked down, like the level of DV, domestic violence went through the roof, and just horrific. Like people were just trapped with monsters, and people were coming undone because they had no distractions, all the ways in which they'd normally support themselves. If you're an extrovert, it was a particularly tricky time. Those of us that were introverted, it was fantastic, loved it. But very, very rough. And COVID was, very good for business. But
is there some stat on like divorces or separations over that time? Like, I know there's other stats around COVID, but was there anything that was leveled out around people that didn't survive?
I don't have a specific stat, but I know it went through the roof. And there were certain countries where they were reporting just massive divorce rates following it. Because people come up to Christmas, and Christmas is tricky enough, where you're spending a week together, and somebody, and 70% of the time it's the woman just goes, I'm not doing this another day, and then they divorce. There's a whole bunch of stats around how terribly. You can look at it in terms of men are awesome at certain things, like men are awesome at going to jail. Because 90% of incarceration is going to be men. Men are awesome at being bad in marriages because like at least 70% of all marriage, and divorces are initiated by women. Violence, mostly men. And we're just a little stuck in terms of how we get along because we're not great at intimacy and connection and vulnerability. And that disassociation leads us to behave in ways that are very painful and problematic, particularly for the women in our lives and maybe even our children. And COVID really amplified that.
I hear that, but also I hear the words baby reindeer in my head.
Yeah, I haven't even seen that show because I hear it's disturbing.
It is disturbing. I watched maybe a few episodes and then my wife told me the rest of it because I wasn't brave enough to watch it. But
I'm not even brave enough to start.
No, it's like Kathy Bates.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
I remember that. Misery, right?
Misery. It's the similar thing.
I remember Misery.
It's when the women go off, it's terrifying.
Go rogue.
Right.
Because we don't expect it. We sort of expect the men to be the villain.
Yeah.
And yet this sort of sinister, maniacal sort of feeling comes across them.
Look, without being a dick about it, because that's my speciality, I really hate it when we're talking about DV towards women and then men push back and go, yeah, but it happens to men too. Like the stats are massively different. Like it's quite upsetting when you sat in places where guys have tied family to washing lines and set fire to them. Like the difference between a woman attacking a man and a man attacking women is monumental. And I don't even like them being in the same paragraph. Men are killing women all over the place. And it's now become a significant piece of law. We now have coercive control being put forward as being an actual criminal act, which is important. Because half the time when a guy kills a woman, he's never laid a hand on her before, ever, and he's just hit this thing called humiliation rage and gone right over the edge. It's trauma-based, but that doesn't make her any less dead.
Wow. So, wow. First time, this bang.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Like I was shocked the first time I heard
Gee,
that.
I can't believe it.
Well, I had a supervisor who wrote the manual for Relationships Australia called Taking Responsibility. And I guess I used to underplay it because I'm a little on the aggressive side myself, and I kind of play it down. And she's like, you need to take a serious look at this. Oftentimes, the guy kills the woman and there's been nothing before that. But if you look at coercive control in terms of dictating who people can hang out with, what they can wear, financially controlling nature, all of these are clues that add up. And you can point to it and go, look, there's a pattern there, and there's a pattern that ends in her death.
It's amazing that there's not like some violence before just that sort of the ultimate. Yeah.
What disturbs me about it as a guy is that all of us have the ability to snap, and yet all of us go, no, I couldn't possibly. Well, they said that too. And I don't want to be a downer about this, but it's a really big issue. Women attacking men, really.
Good for the movies.
It's good for movies.
Yeah.
Like
I don't think I've ever
Close
seen in the press where it's like a woman's attacked a man and killed a man. I don't think I can even remember.
You can find them. There are outliers.
But I haven't thinking about it, like watching the news.
Quite often self-defense. There's a high-profile case. There's one in Melbourne where there was a woman who was like was being battered by her husband who was highly aggressive, and she ended up killing him with a shotgun. But she didn't go to jail. She could demonstrate that she'd been physically, psychologically, emotionally abused for decades, and he was probably going to kill her in that moment. Yeah. But listen, let me move this away from where we've ended up.
Death
here in the longevity lounge.
Death and men are bad.
Gee whiz.
Now, just Michael, you are a reconnection relationship expert. As people move into their 40s, 50s, 60s, can you give us an idea of some of the things they should be doing for high relational health to help themselves have a better life?
There was a massive study done that ended up with the name. It was in a book called The Normal Bar, right? Which is not a pub or a tavern, bar as in level, right? And the research they did pointed to the fact that couples that did better maintained a sense of romance, and out of that passion, and because of the passion would then facilitate more romance. So it's a self-reinforcing cycle of goodness and greatness. And there were certain characteristics to what these people were doing. And it's not really about age. It's about complacency, And it depends on where you're at in a particular cycle. I mean, there's an argument that says, okay, if you just get obese and your health is shot, then of course you're going to show up more poorly in relationships. So there's a lot to be said for looking after yourself. I get that. But the bigger picture stuff is things like they tell each other they love each other daily and they mean it. They have an understanding about what's going on in their partner's lives. They cuddle. Like every couple that cuddles has sex. Those that don't cuddle, 6% of them talk about having a reasonable sex life. So if you're not cuddling, it's very unlikely that you're going to be having a great sex life.
Let me get a pen and paper here. I'll start jotting this stuff down.
No, you're not cuddling me. Let's get on with it.
And there's another good one in that the couples that do really well understand what turns their partner on and turns them off and actually apply it. Things like that. We pay attention to details, as opposed to couples that don't do terribly well in that they just kind of turn away from each other, and somebody gets fixated on work and somebody might get fixated on children, and they fill their lives and they're kind of in this parallel lives routine. And out of that, we've just got endless misery. We got people that we talk about being masters in relationships, and then we've got disasters. And in the middle, we've got these things that we refer to, as relationships that are comfortably miserable. Right. And that's a glacial slide to infidelity. Now, I love infidelity. I'm a massive fan, right? It's really important. If you can't get your partner's attention any other way for a conversation, in terms of wives, go sleep with his brother.
Jeez.
You'll be in marriage therapy 1 week later.
Oh my goodness.
He likes it because it's good for business.
Yeah.
I love it because it's good for business. But here's the reality. It's incredibly traumatic, but at the same time, it is a very powerful springboard for developing a relationship and moving it forward.
Like a circuit breaker, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not the end of your marriage. People will pretend it is all the time. If you ever cheat on me, we're done. Everybody says that, and yet people show up in my room. It's not true because we didn't come in as virgins.
I think the brother, though, that's hard. That's a hard one to get over. That's tough.
Depends on your brother.
That's exactly
Depends
right.
if you know the bloke or not.
This program is proudly brought to you by Ascend Performance Collagen Protein. Ascend Performance Collagen Protein uses the highest quality ingredients, is dairy-free and tastes great. Each serve contains 25 grams of protein and includes Tenderfort for joint and ligament support, as well as Gut Matrix to help support a healthy and diverse gut microbiome using a unique combination of pre, pro, and postbiotic ingredients. To find out more or purchase, go to ascendperformance.com.au.
We grew up with these these solitary heroes, right? Men that didn't need anything. You know, I sort of, maybe the Thomas Crown Affair was a show back at a time when, you know, it might have been Pierce Brosnan had everything he needed. The relationships were secondary. Bond is probably another one where, you know, has girls, but they're just for a bit of fun. You know, this entirely independent. I feel like these were the heroes of our time. And then we somehow have emulated that, or wanted to, knowingly or otherwise, that have put us in this position where being vulnerable and admitting that we need companionship, love, care, support, it's a little bit difficult, if not foreign.
It's very foreign. I mean, I know the heroes. I mean, Cool Hand Luke in one of those movies was incredible. John Wayne. I mean, seriously. I mean, I get the ideology, but it's scientifically proven to be fatal. You know, men die 7 years earlier than women because we just lack those emotional connections and affection. If a guy ends up being widowed, he generally dies within a year or two because he's got nothing to live for.
Wow.
If her husband dies, she just carries on regardless because she still has her good community of friends and contacts. Your average male around about 40, his only real connection will be his wife and his children. I think that's slightly different in Australia because you've known each other since you were 6 and stuff. It's an interesting place to live. But I would question how deep and meaningful those relationships are because time and time again, I'll hear from guys, yeah, he seemed perfectly fine. And then 10 minutes later, he killed himself. Like we had the most normal conversation in the world. And then 10 minutes later, he went away and hung himself. That's a quote from one of my clients. So I do question the depth of the relationships that people are having because having another beer is not a solution. And in Australia, you've got that whole kind of thing about toughen the up. It's not helpful.
No.
You know, we've got to soften up a little, like our tender little hearts out there in the world and be loved.
Michael, you look like a treat, fit, healthy, and obviously very knowledgeable in the relationship sides of things. What do you do to keep yourself in good nick?
Well, I absolutely agree that it's important to stay in good nick, you know, and just to be able to show up and live life, you know. I lift, you know, and that's always been important. And alongside that is the Pilates, if I'm quite honest.
I do it too.
I get back injuries regularly, and the only thing that never hurts me is Pilates. And eventually I was like, well, why am I only doing this when I need rehab? Why don't I just keep it as a piece of what I do? So I got this fantastic Pilates teacher. She's amazing and thoroughly interesting, which is unusual for Pilates. And then there's all the nutrition stuff. So I put food ahead of exercise, but I also know that like I need bone density. I need muscle mass because without that, I'm going to have a significant problem. So
the data, the science is unwavering with exercise. You know, we're talking about, you know, you can live, you know, much, much longer on this earth. And obviously exercise helps mental health as well. So, you know, what would be, so if you took like, and you said before about relationships and that sort of link to living a longer life, it seems to me that the superpowers in longevity comes down to good relationships and that honesty with it and exercise. Have you got some information on that?
Well, look, my own life is exercise. You know, I love it. It's really important. I want to be able to show up naked and enjoy myself. You can see quality of life is hugely impacted. For me, the science is it's all about your connection. Without that, you will die early, regardless of what you're doing. And Peter Attia goes, look, if you haven't dialed in your VO2 max and your heavy weightlifting, then pretty much you're wasting your time on everything else, you know, like the supplements and things like that. And I agree with that. And I just think the relationships are slightly further ahead than like connection and intimacy and empathy are the most important pieces for me, because without that, I feel kind of dead inside. I have a phrase, it's like we should stop being quite so fascinated with buns of steel and start cultivating hearts of gold. You know, stop fixating on the packaging and start working on the content. However, it's a huge part. And without it, you know, you're just going to be creaky and miserable and kind of just crabby. Yeah. Like, we got to be athletic. We're born for that. That's what.
And also the mind too, right? Like, you know, we always talk about how long we can live and how well, but there's no point being the fittest guy on the block if you can't remember your mate's name. So you're not mentally sharp cognitively, right?
Yeah.
But then as you say, well, then there's no point having a great mind and being physically on top of the tree for your age if you're miserable because your relationships are poor. So there's something in all of that, isn't there?
So there's a guy called Arthur C. Brooks who talks about how to be happy. And his whole thing is satisfaction and a sense of purpose and what you're looking for out of life. And that ties directly back in with Harvard's study around satisfaction, how well you live and how long you live. And I think being physical is part of what we are. If you're born to be an athlete, you've got to be an athlete. Like if you're born to be a poet, you've got to be a poet. And when you look at Abraham Maslow and his whole hierarchy of needs in terms of what it takes to really thrive, he's really clear that if you settle for the easy life, you can guarantee to be miserable. Like it just doesn't work for human beings. We need meaning. Right. And wherever we find that meaning is really important. And some people find it in being athletic and some people find it in train spotting. You know, we're interesting creatures, but wherever we find that meaning is important because it keeps our brains alive in much the same way you're talking about. We need to be all of those things.
We spend most of our time talking about longevity for our second half of our life. If we look at the younger generations now and discipline, right? And I don't mean like, you know, military discipline, but the ability to do things that we don't want to do. So I've got an 11-year-old daughter. I'm not sure that she does anything that she doesn't want to do. And the point that you're making there around showing up and doing the things that we need to and having a fulfilling existence, that involves that level of discipline where we go, you know, I don't want to do this, but it's important. You know, Huberman talks about the cold baths that really physiologically it may not have a massive impact, but psychologically it does. It helps you realize I can do hard things. And Leechy, I know from your background, you did sport at some stage. Don't remember quite what it was, but
apparently
you've done a few things. And my own background in sport, some of the biggest highs or greatest sense of satisfaction have come with a very steep learning curve and also being locked in the hurt box for a long period of time.
There was a direct correlation for me. The greater the effort leading into a race over a period of time, the greater the feeling when I won. So it was direct. So if I felt like I'd only done a month or two of training to get a win, then that was how much of a high I got. But if I dedicated a year of workload for one particular race and targeted that and worked my ring out and sacrificed and did things that others wouldn't do to get the result, then the high was immense. And nothing in my life up until now has ever felt as high as those wins in those races where I've dedicated like a year of my life to get the result.
That's incredible. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, 17 sessions a week, eating what I was meant to eat, sleeping during the day between sessions, Sundays off, regimentation, bleeding and training for a year to win a particular race. And then you can imagine an Olympic athlete that goes on a 4-year cycle and they've got to cover off 4 years of their life to go and get a result in a period of time. Like someone like Usain Bolt works for 4 years to be the fastest man on the earth to run just over 9 seconds to win. It's quite amazing, isn't it, when you think about it in those terms? And
it really is.
For me, I've never had the greatest, like anywhere near. I search for highs now, but I can't get anywhere near what I got when I was competing back in those days.
So strange that
Just sort of sad in some ways.
Strange that we've ended up talking about you.
Yeah, well, you asked.
So, Michael,
I'm guessing you guys have been friends for a while, right?
Well, we have, but it's more that we spoke of earlier, where you've got one friend, you don't really know much about him or necessarily care. Michael, you're
Carl calls himself the podcast prince. You can see where he got that from. Yeah.
You're an expert in this field, and I think for anyone listening to this particular podcast, they're going to want to step out of this and have a think, reflect on their relationship and what they can do in terms of building that relational health and perhaps intimacy that's going to help them in the future. Have you got some practical tips?
Well, if you want to avoid consuming, huge amounts of books, I mean, my website, we have 2 quizzes. One is for relationship satisfaction and the other one is the infidelity index. And both of them will give you some pretty solid clues in terms of what you're getting right and what you're getting wrong. But it's most fundamental. In a world where we can be anything, my suggestion would be to be loving, like be loving towards our partners. And in terms of what keeps me young, it's making sure my wife's happy, because I don't know whether you've noticed, but if your partner's not happy, you never will be.
Yeah, spot on.
I have this from Terry Real and John Gottman. I've seen it in person. The secret of a happy life for men is to give her what she wants. I find women to be largely reasonable in terms of their requests and demands, and men to be a little bit on the stubborn side of life, and they just make themselves miserable. And as Ali Wong says, women are experts in holding men's self-esteem hostage. If you're not giving them what they want, you're going to suffer. So that's one way of looking at it. my actual view on it is that women are more relational than men. They understand how to be intimate and connected, and they're just pulling to make us that little bit better. And if we stop resisting and fighting and pretending somehow we're experts in how to be relational, we'll do a lot better. Like we've just got to be able to accept female influence, which is a pretty big deal for most men. So that's what I'd say. If you want a better life, give her what she wants.
And that comes up with the classic line, happy wife, happy life.
Yes. And that's what it comes down to. I'm sorry, guys, but that is what it comes down to. Now, the woke version is happy spouse, happy house, but that's nonsense. Who cares what we feel like?
Michael, thanks so much for joining us on the Longevity Lounge. We'll no doubt see you again.
Very pleased to be here. Can't wait to come back.
Thanks, Michael.